I slept with my husband's boss to get a promotion, and he doesn't know about it. I've always admired my husband for his grit and dedication. Jason is the kind of guy who stays late, picks up slack, and goes above and beyond for his team. He's been working as a project manager at his company for 6 years, a role he outgrew at least 3 years ago. Every time he applied for a promotion, he got the same response: "You're doing great, but the timing isn't right." That timing never seemed to arrive. Jason's boss, Richard, was the one holding the keys. Richard was charismatic and well-connected, but had a reputation for being difficult. Still, my husband held out hope, thinking hard work and loyalty would win the day. It was heartbreaking to watch him come home dejected every time someone else got a promotion. I could see how much it was eating away at him, even though he tried to hide it behind his proud, determined smile. It all came to a head at the company's annual corporate party. Jason wanted to skip it, saying it was a waste of time, but I insisted we go. "You've got to show face," I reminded him. "Let them see how dedicated you are." At the party, Jason drifted off to mingle with his team while I found myself at the bar. That's where Richard cornered me. I'd met him before. He always had this oily charm about him that put me on edge. He complimented my dress, a little too eagerly, then started asking questions about Jason's career. "Jason's a good worker," Richard said, swirling his whiskey. "But he doesn't have the edge I need in upper management." I bit my lip. My husband was too proud to schmooze, too honest to play politics. "He deserves a shot," I said firmly. Richard raised an eyebrow, smirking like he'd heard this 1,000 times before. Then, after a long sip, he leaned in closer and said something that made my stomach flip. "Convince me." At first, I thought I misunderstood. I played it off with a laugh, but Richard's expression didn't change. His meaning was clear. I felt a cold sweat break out under the party lights. I tried to brush him off, but Richard had planted a seed, a horrible, desperate idea that kept growing in my mind even after the night was over. Jason didn't notice my mood on the way home, too busy talking about how he thought the night had gone well. I smiled and nodded, but inside, I was spiraling. Could I really go through with something like that? Could I make that kind of sacrifice for Jason's career? The idea haunted me for days. I tried to dismiss it as a ridiculous thought, but every time Jason came home frustrated, it crept back into my mind. Each time he stared at his laptop late into the night, analyzing numbers or writing reports that his boss barely acknowledged, my guilt grew. I hated Richard for putting me in this position. He knew exactly how much power he held over Jason's career, and it sickened me that he'd exploit that for his own gain. But what twisted me up inside was that Jason would never, in a million years, agree to this. He'd walk away from the company before compromising his principles, or mine, but he didn't know how much I wanted to see him happy, to see him succeed. I couldn't stand the look of defeat on his face anymore. A week later, I found myself standing outside a sleek downtown hotel. I'd sent Richard a vague text earlier, hinting at a private meeting. He'd responded almost immediately with a time and place. My hands shook as I texted him back to confirm, my stomach churning with shame. When I walked into the lobby, my heels clicking against the marble floor, I half hoped he wouldn't show. But there he was, sitting in a quiet corner with a drink already in hand. Richard smiled as soon as he saw me, a predator sensing weakness. "You're punctual." "I like that," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "What can I do for you?" He knew exactly why I was there. He wanted me to say it. I swallowed hard, willing myself not to cry. I told myself I was doing this for Jason, that it was the only way to break through the ceiling that Richard had built over his career. "This can't affect Jason," I said, my voice trembling. "If I do this, he can never know." Richard leaned back in his chair, a satisfied grin spreading across his face. "Of course. This stays between us." His assurance didn't bring me any comfort. If anything, it made me feel like I was already in too deep. He slid a hotel key card across the table, his fingers brushing against mine. "Room 1212, he said casually, like he was discussing a business meeting. "Take your time." I wanted to run, but I stayed. The thought of Jason being stuck in the same position for years, while lesser men climbed past him, kept me rooted to the spot. I was doing this for us, or at least, that's what I kept telling myself as I made my way to the elevator. The encounter itself was quick and cold, more transactional than I'd expected. Richard didn't waste any time gloating or lingering. When it was over, I left the hotel feeling hollow, my reflection in the elevator mirror barely recognizable. That night, Jason came home with flowers. He'd been promoted. "It's finally happening, babe," he said, sweeping me into a hug. His face lit up with pride as he told me the details, the new title, the raise, the opportunities that came with it. I smiled and kissed him back, fighting the tears that threatened to spill over. I wanted to tell myself it was worth it, that I'd done the right thing. But all I could feel was the weight of what I'd just done, pressing down on me like a secret I'd never be able to shed. The promotion was everything Jason had dreamed of, and he dove into his new role with the same relentless energy he'd always shown. But this time, his efforts were finally rewarded. He came home happier, lighter, with stories about the respect he was earning from his peers. I should have been thrilled. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt like a fraud every time I smiled back at him. Jason insisted on celebrating with Richard and his wife. "It's the least I can do to thank him," he said. My stomach dropped. He's finally recognized what I'm capable of. He's been a real mentor through this process. I wanted to tell him the truth. I wanted to scream that Richard wasn't a mentor. He was a manipulative predator. But I couldn't risk it. Jason's pride in his accomplishment was too pure, too heartfelt. Tearing it down now would destroy him. I agreed to host the dinner, though I dreaded every second of planning it. The night of the event, I wore the nicest dress I could find, hoping to armor myself in confidence. When the doorbell rang, Jason rushed to open it, greeting Richard and his wife like they were old friends. The dinner started smoothly. Jason shared stories about his work, and Richard laughed along, playing the part of the supportive boss. His wife was charming, complimenting our home and my cooking. It all felt so painfully normal until Richard found a moment to corner me in the kitchen. I was pouring drinks when I felt his presence behind me. His hand brushed lightly against my back as he leaned in, his voice low enough that no one else could hear. "You look stunning tonight," he murmured. I stiffened, keeping my eyes on the glasses. "Don't," I whispered. He chuckled softly, ignoring my plea. "You really went all out for this dinner. I wonder if Jason realizes how far you're willing to go to help him succeed." The glass in my hand trembled, and I gripped it tighter to keep from dropping it. "You need to leave me alone," I said through gritted teeth. Richard's smile didn't falter as he picked up the drinks and carried them back to the table, leaving me standing there, shaking with anger and shame. Back at the table, Jason raised his glass in a toast. "To Richard," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "For believing in me and giving me the opportunity to prove myself." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I forced a smile and lifted my glass, praying no one noticed the way my hand shook. Richard met my eyes over the rim of his glass, a smirk playing at his lips. After they left, Jason couldn't stop talking about how well the night had gone. "Did you see how much he enjoyed the meal? I think we made a great impression." He wrapped his arms around me, kissing my cheek. "You're amazing, you know that? I couldn't have done this without you." I nodded numbly, guilt clawing at my chest. This was supposed to feel like a victory. Instead, it felt like the beginning of a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Life moved on, but I felt like I was walking through quicksand. Every time Jason mentioned Richard in passing, some new project, an insightful piece of advice, a joke shared over lunch, it was another reminder of what I had done. Worse, Richard seemed determined to remind me to AT first. It was subtle, a lingering touch on my arm when we crossed paths at company events, a comment whispered too close for comfort. Then it escalated. He started finding excuses to run into me. At the grocery store, in the parking lot when I picked Jason up from work, Richard always appeared with that smug grin, like we shared some dark, forbidden joke. One evening, Jason came home late, buzzing with excitement. "Richard thinks I should lead the new client onboarding project. It's a huge deal. It could mean even bigger things for me down the line." His face was alight with pride, but all I could feel was dread. "More hours, huh?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "For now, yeah, but it's worth it. This could fast-track me to a senior director role." He didn't notice the way my smile faltered, too caught up in the momentum of his success. That night, as he worked late at the dining table, I stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the walls of our secret close in tighter. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. Jason had just left for the office when my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, but I knew who it was before I answered. "Hello." I trust you've been well, Richard said, his voice slick with mock concern. Busy supporting Jason in his new role, I assume? What do you want? I snapped, keeping my voice low even though I was alone. Richard chuckled. Just a friendly chat. You've been avoiding me. There's nothing to talk about. Don't be so cold. I thought we had an understanding. His tone shifted, the thin veneer of politeness falling away. You and I both know one night wasn't going to be enough. My blood ran cold. What are you talking about? Oh, come on, he said, his voice turning sharper. Jason's promotion doesn't come free. You think I don't know how hard he's working right now? How much he relies on me? I couldn't breathe. Are you threatening me? Not at all, Richard said smoothly. I'm simply reminding you of the arrangement. You're a smart woman. You wouldn't want Jason to lose everything he's worked so hard for, would you? The line went dead, but his words hung in the air like a noose tightening around my neck. I sat there in silence, gripping the phone, my mind racing. For the first time, I realized this wasn't something I could control. Richard wasn't just a problem, I was trapped in his game. When Jason called me later that day, I nearly broke. He wanted to know if we could invite Richard over again to discuss a potential next step in his career. My heart sank, and I knew I couldn't keep this secret much longer. It had been a few weeks since Jason's promotion, and life seemed to be settling into a rhythm. Jason was more confident, more fulfilled. Every day, he came home with new stories of his projects, the praise he received, and how much he admired Richard's leadership. I smiled when he told me these things, but inside, I felt like a shadow of myself. One evening, Jason came home with an unfamiliar energy, not his usual post-work excitement, but something deeper. He was practically glowing as he loosened his tie and tossed his bag onto the couch. You won't believe what happened today, he said, sitting beside me. What's up? I asked, trying to sound cheerful. He leaned forward, his eyes alight with excitement. I got an offer. A big one. My heart skipped a beat. An offer? He nodded. One of our biggest competitors reached out to me. They want me to join their team as a senior executive. It's a massive step up, better pay, better benefits. They even threw in a signing bonus. That's incredible, I said, forcing my lips into a smile. But my stomach churned. Another company had recognized his talent without any underhanded deals, without Richard's interference. This was proof that Jason's hard work was enough all along. A bitter knot of regret tightened in my chest. Jason's expression softened. It's flattering, but I turned them down. The words hit me like a freight train. You turned them down? He nodded, looking almost wistful. It wasn't an easy decision. The offer was amazing, but I couldn't leave Richard. He's been such a good mentor to me. He's pushed me in ways I didn't even realize I needed. I wouldn't be where I am without him. I froze, my throat tightening. Jason believed Richard was his friend, his guide. He had no idea what kind of man Richard truly was. He was turning down a better future because of a lie I helped create. Jason noticed my silence and reached for my hand. Hey, are you okay? I blinked, snapping out of my thoughts. Yeah, I'm fine. It's just a big decision. He smiled, squeezing my hand. It was, but I know I made the right one. Richard believes in me, and I believe in him. He's got plans for my career here, big plans. My chest felt like it was caving in. Jason's loyalty to Richard, his gratitude, it was built on a foundation of deceit. And I was the one who'd laid the bricks. As Jason talked about the new projects Richard had assigned him, my mind spiraled. If I had just trusted in Jason's abilities, if I hadn't let my desperation cloud my judgment, none of this would have happened. He would have found his way on his own, like he always did. And now, because of me, he was bound to a man who was using him like a pawn. That night, after Jason fell asleep, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the darkened window. The reflection that stared back at me was a stranger. My choices had led us here, and I didn't know how to undo them. I thought I could keep it together, but Richard's shadow loomed over every part of our lives. Jason, blissfully unaware, was thriving in his new role, throwing himself into late nights and new responsibilities. He had no idea the sacrifices I had made, or the ones Richard now expected me to continue making. One afternoon, I was folding laundry when my phone buzzed. I almost didn't answer, but the number was familiar, the office landline. I picked up. Hey, babe. Jason's voice came through, light and cheerful. I just had a quick question. Of course, I replied, trying to sound normal. Do we still have that old photo album from our first trip to the mountains? Richard and I were talking, and I told him about that crazy hike we did. He's got a trip planned with his wife and thought it sounded perfect. The casualness of his request knocked the air out of me. You talked about our trip with Richard? Yeah, why not? He's a good guy. It's nice to finally have a boss I can relate to. I felt like the walls were closing in. I'll find it for you, I said quickly, desperate to end the conversation. When we hung up, I stared at the phone in my hand, my chest heaving. Richard wasn't just a predator, he was worming his way into every corner of our lives. And Jason, in his earnestness, couldn't see it. That evening, as Jason sorted through his emails, I tried to make dinner. My hands shook as I chopped vegetables, the knife slipping dangerously close to my fingers more than once. All I could think about was how easily I'd let Richard into our lives, how willingly I'd sacrificed my integrity, and now Jason's trust, for a man who didn't deserve a shred of it. Jason broke my spiraling thoughts when he called out, "Oh, this is interesting." I turned, trying to mask my unease. "What is?" He smiled, holding up his phone. "I got an email from the company that offered me the senior executive position. They're still interested. They're upping the offer, double the signing bonus, even more flexibility. It's almost too good to pass up." My heart leapt. This was a chance, a way out. "Jason, that's amazing," I said, my voice trembling. He leaned back, shaking his head. "It's flattering, but I don't think I can do it." My stomach dropped. "Why not?" "Richard," he said simply. "He's invested in me. I can't just walk away after everything he's done. It would feel like a betrayal." I set the knife down, gripping the counter for support. The room seemed to tilt. Jason was turning down a life-changing opportunity because of Richard. Because of me, Jason must have noticed something in my face. He walked over, wrapping an arm around my shoulder. "Hey, are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said quickly, pulling away. "Just tired." "You've been amazing through all this," he said, kissing my temple. "I don't say it enough, but I couldn't have done any of this without you." As he walked away, I stared after him, tears burning my eyes. His words, meant to comfort, only deepened my despair. I'd done this. I'd made a mess so tangled that even Jason's best chance at happiness was bound to a man who would never let us go. I barely slept that night. Jason's loyalty to Richard, his belief in their friendship, was the cruelest twist of all. Every moment he spent praising the man who had torn through our lives made my guilt heavier, like a chain I couldn't escape. The next day, I was doing the dishes when my phone buzzed again. I didn't need to look to know it was Richard. I let it ring. But the moment it stopped, it started again. Reluctantly, I picked up. "I've been patient." Richard's voice came through, calm but with an edge of menace. "But you're testing me." "I told you, I'm done," I snapped, my voice trembling. "I'm not playing your games anymore." Richard chuckled, low and condescending. "That's cute. But you and I both know it doesn't work that way. Do you think Jason's future just maintains itself? If you want him to keep climbing, you know what needs to happen." My grip tightened on the phone. "You're disgusting." "Maybe," he said, his tone icy now. "But I'm also in control. And if you cross me, Jason will feel it. He's good at his job, but I've made better men disappear for less." I sank into a chair, my knees weak. "You can't do this." "I already have," he replied smoothly. "I'm giving you one last chance to see reason. You know how to reach me." He hung up, leaving me shaking. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering onto the table. This had gone too far. I wasn't just destroying myself anymore. I was risking Jason's career, his reputation, everything he had worked for. That evening, when Jason came home, I tried to act normal. He kissed me on the cheek, humming to himself as he pulled off his tie. "You won't believe the day I had," he said. "Richard's been hinting at an even bigger project, something game-changing." I forced a smile, my heart breaking all over again. "That's amazing." He nodded, beaming. "Yeah, it's like everything's falling into place. I can't believe how lucky I've been." Lucky. That word made me sick. Jason wasn't lucky. He was talented, hardworking, and brilliant. And yet here he was, believing his success depended on a man like Richard. As Jason went upstairs to shower, I sat on the couch, staring blankly at the wall. I couldn't keep this up. Richard wasn't going to stop, and neither was my guilt. I had to make a choice, Keep pretending or tell Jason the truth and risk losing everything. When Jason came back downstairs, fresh and smiling, I knew what I had to do. Jason, I said, my voice trembling. We need to talk. He frowned, sitting down beside me. What's going on? I took a deep breath, the words sitting like stones on my tongue. It's about Richard. There's something I've been hiding from you. Jason's brow furrowed as he leaned closer. What do you mean? What's going on? I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. My heart was pounding, my hands trembling as I tried to force myself to start. Finally, I took a deep breath and plunged in. It's about your promotion, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. And Richard. Jason's frown deepened. What about him? I couldn't look at him, so I stared down at my hands. The night of the corporate party, Richard approached me. He suggested that your promotion could depend on something I could do for him. Jason's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. What kind of something? I felt like I was being crushed under the weight of my guilt. He wanted something personal. And I thought I was helping you. I didn't know what else to do. Jason's eyes widened as the pieces began to fall into place. He sat back, shaking his head. You're telling me you went along with it? Tears streamed down my face as I nodded. I thought it was the only way. You were working so hard, and he kept passing you over. I just wanted to help. Jason stood, pacing the room as his anger boiled over. You thought that was helping? You went behind my back, betrayed me like that? And for what? A job? A title? I didn't know what else to do, I said desperately. He wouldn't promote you. He made it clear he never would unless I agreed. Jason turned to face me, his eyes blazing with hurt. Do you think I wanted a promotion handed to me because of that? Do you think I'm that weak, that incapable? I shook my head, sobbing now. No, I knew you deserved it. But he was never going to give you a chance. He laughed bitterly, running a hand through his hair. And now I'm stuck with this man as my mentor? The person I've been defending, praising, turning down better offers for? You let me tie my career to him without even giving me the choice. I'm so sorry, I whispered. I thought I was doing the right thing. I see now that I wasn't. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Jason stared at me, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. You didn't just betray me, he said finally, his voice low and trembling. You betrayed everything we built together. He grabbed his keys, heading for the door. Jason, wait, I called after him, my voice breaking. Please, let's talk about this. He stopped, his back to me, his shoulders tense. I don't know if there's anything left to talk about. And then he was gone. I sat on the floor where I had collapsed, the silence of the house echoing around me. I didn't know if he'd come back or if this was the end. All I knew was that the choice I had made to protect him had destroyed the very thing I'd been trying to save.